The story begins with Shirou Emiya, who is woken up by his close friend Sakura. After having an interesting breakfast with Sakura and his legal guardian and homeroom teacher Teiga, Shirou goes to school and fixes a heater for his best friend Issei, which is briefly observed by another student named Rin Tohsaka. Issei remarks that Shirou never hesitates in helping people in need and warns him that he may be taken advantage of by inconsiderate people like Shinji, who happens to be Shirou's old friend and Sakura's brother. While walking home from school, he encounters a little girl named Ilyasviel Einsburn, who warns him to summon a servant soon before vanishing. The next day, while helping Sakura with the dishes, Shirou notices a bruise on her hand and assumes that Shinji is beating her. Later at school, he learns from Ayako that Shinji has recently been acting more aggressively. He is also informed by other female students of the murders of a family of 4. While visiting the crime scene, Shirou recalls the time that he was rescued by Kiritsugu Emiya in the aftermath of a devastating fire that occurred 10 years ago, later being adopted by him and learning that he is a mage. Shirou notes how he had devoted his life to Kiritsugu's ideals of becoming a hero of justice. The following day, Shirou stays late at school and confronts Shinji about Sakura's injury, but Shinji denies any involvement before asking Shirou to clean the school's archery dojo, which he decides to do. After finishing, Shirou witnesses the fight between Archer and Lancer but gets noticed. Running inside the school, Shirou is suddenly cornered by Lancer, who stabs him in the heart using a red spear-like noble phantasm named Gibalg and flees. Shirou nearly dies from his wound but is revived by Rin, who quickly leaves before he can recognize her. Returning home, Shirou is attacked by Lancer once again, being forced to escape into the backyard shed. There he accidentally activates a magic circle and summons Saber, who wards off Lancer after a brief battle. After identifying Shirou as her master, Saber engages Archer in a sword fight, but Shirou uses one of his 3 command seals to stop her before she injures Archer. Shirou is then calmly greeted by Rin. Back in Shirou's home, Rin tells him that he is chosen as one of the 7 masters for the Holy Grail War. When Shirou is unable to comprehend the situation, Rin decides to take him to see Kairi Katamine, a priest who is her legal guardian and also the overseer of the war. When they arrive at the church and meet up with Kairi, Shirou learns that the responsibilities of a master are unavoidable once chosen. After hearing about the Holy Grail and the purpose of the war, Shirou learns that there were 4 Holy Grail Wars before the current one, with the latest one taking place 10 years ago. Kairi, saying that there can be no action taken against a victor with dark intentions, realizes that Shirou has no interest in fighting. He explains that at the conclusion of the previous Holy Grail War, an evil master touched the Holy Grail, resulting in the horrifying fire that Shirou survived. Kairi adds that before the evil master appeared, a good master won and held the Holy Grail, but the Grail deemed the good master unworthy due to his refusal to fight. Shirou regroups with Saber outside of the church, declaring that he finally accepts his responsibilities as a master, so they agree to fight in the 5th Holy Grail War together. Archer informs Rin that they should attack since Shirou is now a proper master. Rin responds by saying that she still has a debt to pay Shirou in return for saving her life, deciding to let Shirou and Saber return home. Moments later, they are confronted by Ilia, who is revealed to be the master of the servant Berserker. Ilia introduces herself and Rin seems familiar with Ilia's family name. Rin and Archer evaluate Berserker before Archer moves to a farther position so he can attack Berserker from a distance. Berserker then attacks Saber, who is overwhelmed by his brute strength and agility. Archer and Rin try to provide support for Saber, but Berserker constantly winds up being unaffected by their strikes due to his noble phantasm god hand, which grants him automatic resurrection and immunity to lower level attacks. When the fight moves away into the suburbs, Rin orders Shirou to run, but he remembers his agreement with Saber and follows them instead. As the fight progresses, Kairi is visited by Gilgamesh, as they both claim their intentions to witness the materialization of the Holy Grail in its fullest detail. The fight then moves through a forest and into a local cemetery where Rin tries to kill Ilia, but Ilia counters with several bird-shaped homunculi. She traps Rin, but before she can go any further, Rin is rescued by Archer's attacks. While running back to Saber, Rin bumps into Shirou. They watch as Saber kills Berserker, but he suddenly resurrects and regenerates himself using God Hand. Archer projects and fires a sword-shaped arrow at Berserker, which engulfs him in a massive explosion, but it has no effect. Ilia, impressed by Archer's strength, withdraws Berserker and flees. Seconds later, Shirou suddenly begins vomiting blood. Later, an uninjured Shirou wakes up in his home with Rin sitting at his side. Before she leaves, she tells him that they will be enemies when they meet again. Shirou then finds Saber in the apartment dojo, and she reveals that he has self-healing magical capabilities, explaining the absence of the injuries that he sustained in the battle with Berserker. Saber explains the mechanics of the 7 servants as well as in the advantages and disadvantages of knowing a servant's true identity. Since Shirou is an inexperienced mage, he approves of Saber's request of concealing her true identity from him. Shirou and Saber then go to school to deliver lunch to the archery club. There Saber explores the school and has a tense encounter with Suikairu Kyuzuki, one of the instructors, before they are interrupted by Shirou. Later that day, while still at the school, Shirou is approached by Ayako, who asks if he will rejoin the archery club before noting he has never smiled in his life. While walking home with Saber, Sakura and Teiga, Shirou explains that Saber will be staying with him temporarily. Sakura is seemingly horrified by the idea, but Teiga approves under the condition that she stay in the home as well during that time. Meanwhile, Rin and Archer investigate an office building purportedly having a gas leak. They find it is actually the work of the servant Castor, who absorbed the life force of the employees inside and is most likely residing at Ryudu Temple. When Rin decides to pursue Castor, Archer notes that she is ignoring the weaker master that is Shirou. However, Rin states to Archer that she will kill Shirou if he approaches her again. 5 years ago, Kiritsugu tells Shirou about how he once wished to become a hero of justice. Shirou promised Kiritsugu to fulfill that dream in his place, after which Kiritsugu passes away in satisfaction. In the present day, Shirou goes to school alone despite Saber's insistence that she accompany him. At school, Shirou learns from Issei that Ayako had gone missing the previous day, and that she was last seen arguing with Shinji, who is currently absent with no one able to contact him. As school ends for the day, Shirou is confronted by Rin, who attacks him despite his protests. After a brief chase, Rin eventually corners Shirou and tries threatening him into handing over his remaining command seals. Before she can carry out her threat, they hear a scream. Shirou investigates and finds an unconscious female student who has most of her mana absorbed. As Rin treats the female student, Shirou is wounded after shielding her from an incoming attack by the servant Ryder. He then pursues Ryder into the nearby woods where he is restrained and nearly killed, only to be saved by Rin, whose appearance prompts Ryder to flee. Rin treats Shirou's wounds and decides to call off their fight, taking him to her house to evaluate the situation. Once there, the two agree to have a truce and track down Ryder and her master together. The following night, Rin is outraged upon learning about Shirou's magical training, as Kiritsugu did not adhere to the tradition of magecraft and prioritized himself as a father rather than a mage. Later, Shirou senses Archer following him on his way home, and they have a brief conversation. However, Shirou is surprised that Archer has no interest in the Holy Grail, unlike Saber and the other servants. Archer explains that servants are mere tools for their masters and reveals that he died with no unfulfilled dreams before disappearing. Returning home, Shirou learns from Teiga that Ayako was found alive without any visible injuries. He then meets up with Saber at the apartment dojo, and she approves of the truce that he made with Rin. The next day at the school library, Shirou senses a sigil in one of the bookshelves, which Rin disables. They explore the school grounds and disable other sigils which they realize were set up for strengthening the magical barrier placed over the school. While preparing to head home, Shirou is confronted by Shinji, who reveals himself as Ryder's master and also the one who set up the magical barrier. He also exposing the entire Mato family as a former clan of mages. Shinji tries to convince Shirou to form an alliance, but Shirou turns the offer down with the promise to keep quiet about their conversation. The following night, Shirou is abducted by Castor and finds himself restrained at Ryudu Temple. She admits responsibility for a purported series of gas leaks all over Fuyuki City, enraging Shirou. Meanwhile, Saber senses Shirou's disappearance and heads to Ryudu Temple, only to be halted by the servant assassin, who claims to be the Japanese swordsman Sasaki Kajiro. Then he challenges Saber to a duel. Castor expresses her intention to remove Shirou's command seals and transplant them to her own master. Before she can do so, Archer intervenes and prepares to engage Castor in battle. Outside Ryudu Temple, Saber engages Assassin in battle, but she is shocked to find that she cannot break through his defenses despite her advantages in strength and agility. Inside Ryudu Temple, Castor reveals that she summoned Assassin as her own servant using magecraft. Archer claims that Castor broke the rules of the Holy Grail War and insults her tactics before engaging her in battle. After a while, Archer manages to critically wound Castor, prompting Assassin to prematurely finish his assault on Saber with his secret technique, Swallow Reversal, which is able to cut down a swallow in mid-fight. Archer refuses to finish off Castor, as his main goal is to ensure Shirou's safety, and since he does not believe in senseless slaughter. Castor claims that Shirou and Archer are alike in their ideals, although the two reject her offer to join forces with her. Despite Shirou's protests, Archer allows Castor to flee, knowing full well that she will continue to kill innocent people. Shirou is disgusted by Archer's willingness to allow collateral damage. Yet Archer defends his ideals that Shirou criticizes against, citing that the collateral damage would extend far beyond Fuyuki City if Castor were to win the Holy Grail War. Archer slashes Shirou in the back when the latter is unable to accept this. Shirou staggers out of Ryudu Temple and is tended to by Saber, who survives Assassin's Swallow Reversal. Archer continues his assault but is distracted by Assassin, who allows Saber and Shirou to escape after being impressed by Saber's power. At the apartment dojo, dojo, Shirou asks Saber to teach him the art of swordsmanship, now unwilling to lose to Archer again. After a sparring lesson, Saber notices that Shirou was using Archer's techniques as a basis for study to improve his stance. Shirou arrives late to school and is greeted ominously by Shinji. During lunchtime, Rin reluctantly forces Shirou to eat with her at the school rooftop, where she reveals that she used a command seal to prevent Archer from further attacking Shirou during their alliance. Rin tells Shirou that the bloodline of mages of the Mato family died off with each generation. She admits that she recently found out that Shinji was a master, but she relented in attacking him because he lacked experience in magecraft, which now results in another master present in the school. Ryder activates a stronger magical barrier around the school which absorbs the mana of everyone except Shirou and Rin. The two are attacked by skeletal beings called golems, which forces Shirou to summon Saber through a command seal. Saber battles the golems while Shirou and Rin go to the school's first floor to disable the barrier. After dispatching several golems, Saber faces off against Ryder and manages to stab her. To her surprise, Ryder is revealed to be an apparition created by Castor who disappears. Meanwhile, Shirou and Rin find Shinji and the corpse of the real Ryder, which dissolves, causing the barrier to dissipate. Shinji refuses to identify the servant who killed Ryder and flees the school. Shirou, Saber, and Rin assess the situation and deduce that Castor killed Ryder. Rin also notes Shirou's ability to recognize the conditions of the unconscious students and employees. Shirou replies that he is used to seeing dead bodies, which confuses Rin. After Archer arrives following the battle, Rin informs him that Ryder has been killed by Castor. At his home, Shirou allows Saber to sleep nearby him in his room so she can prevent him from being taken by Castor again. Meanwhile, Shinji arrives at the church and pleads with Kairi to offer shelter and protection. However, when Kairi explains that Shinji is the first master to lose his servant, he blames the uselessness of Ryder as a servant. Realizing Shinji still has a resolve to fight, Kairi tells him there is one additional servant available for usage. Shirou encounters Rin, who is spying on Gilgamesh, who has been observing the Mato home for some time. Later on, after Gilgamesh leaves, Rin asks Shirou his opinion about being adopted into another family without any say at all. While eating dinner, Taiga tells Saber about Shirou and Kiritsugu during Shirou's childhood, commenting that they seem to be polar opposites of each other due to their personalities. When Saber asks him why he wants to become a hero of justice, Shirou vaguely replies that it is because he looks up to them. However, while in his room alone, he concludes that he only wants to follow in Kiritsugu's footsteps, but then remembers from Archer's words that his ideals are flawed. Rin wakes up after having a dream about how Archer became a servant in the first place. She later becomes upset with Archer, who suggests that Castor would have been a more reliable ally than Shirou. At school, Shirou and Rin learn from Issei that Kyuzuki has been living at Ryudu Temple with a mysterious woman who is believed to be his fiancée. Rin theorizes that Kyuzuki is Castor's master and plans on attacking him with a non-lethal magical attack to observe his reaction. The following night, Shirou, Saber, and Rin set up their quarters at an abandoned gas station where Kyuzuki usually passes by. When he arrives, Rin fires the magical attack at him. Kyuzuki is unaffected and Castor arrives for assistance. An outraged Shirou confronts Kyuzuki and asks if he knew about Castor's attacks on innocent people. However, Kyuzuki responds that he was unaware but did not care in the slightest, revealing himself to be a former killer. Rin then attacks Castor as a distraction while Saber tries to strike Kyuzuki, but he uses magically strengthened fists to subdue Saber and Rin. Once Kyuzuki brutalizes Shirou, he responds by summoning Archer's dual swords and uses them to repel Kyuzuki's attacks. When Saber and Rin regain consciousness, Kyuzuki and Castor flee. Rin asks Shirou how he was able to summon weapons, and he reveals that while he specialized in strengthening magic, he first succeeded at using projection magic. Meanwhile, Shinji meets his new servant Gilgamesh, who dismisses the strategy to kill innocent people for their mana and reveals the plan to use the Holy Grail to kill most of the human population in the world. At night, Shirou and Saber return home after their battle with Kyuzuki and Castor, but Shirou hides the fact that he is clearly in pain and off balance as a result of using projection magic. The next day, he goes to school and finds out that Kyuzuki is absent due to what is claimed to be an illness. After school, Shirou returns home, where Rin suddenly arrives unannounced. Shirou, Saber, and Rin proceed to formulate a viable strategy to deal with Castor, which is a full frontal attack against Ryudu Temple. However, Saber and Rin fear that Castor might opt to destroy the entire temple if she is cornered. After dinner, Shirou meets Rin in the courtyard where she muses that Shirou's home is more welcoming than her own, and that perhaps it is better that Shirou did not adopt the lifestyle of a true mage. Although Rin became a mage because she personally enjoys studying magic, Shirou learned magic because he wants to help others. A frustrated Rin cites that it is not right for him to put the happiness of others above his own. She stays at his home for the night after telling him that she plans on punishing him the next day. Later that night, Shirou goes to the shed to practice strengthening magic. Saber comes in to check on Shirou and takes notices of the left side of his body being numb. Archer then arrives and is aware of the symptoms, knowing the precise side effects of projection magic. The pain that Shirou has been feeling is due to activating magic circuits that have long laid dormant. After repairing Shirou's magic circuits and noting of a similar experience, Archer warns Shirou that his ideals are meaningless and doomed to fail, something Shirou denies. In an attempt to make Shirou selfishly happy, Rin decides to take him out on a date into town accompanied by Saber, but Rin teases Shirou the whole time to his chagrin. Shirou turns the tables by making Rin confess that she spent the night with him out of concern, and ultimately he is not satisfied. While returning home, the three find themselves inside a magical barrier, and they are ambushed by Castor and several water golems. Castor reveals that she has Taiga in captivity, threatening Shirou to hand over his magical circuits to her. When Shirou refuses, Castor tells him that she knows about the fire that he survived 10 years ago, then claims her knowledge of a method to summon the Holy Grail without any further fighting, which can only be accomplished by Saber's mana. Shirou allows Castor to take his command seals in order to rescue Taiga, but an ambivalent Saber engages Castor in battle. However, Shirou accidentally uses a command seal to stop Saber, allowing Castor to stab Saber's heart with her dagger-like noble phantasm known as Rule Breaker. This takes Shirou's remaining command seals and gives Castor control over Saber. After releasing Taiga, Castor forces Saber to kill Rin, but Shirou is injured while taking the blow. Saber then resists against Castor's magic long enough for Shirou, Rin, and Taiga to escape with assistance from Archer. Regaining consciousness at Rin's house, Shirou finds a red jewel pendant, the same one that Rin used to revive him after he was first stabbed by Lancer. Meanwhile, Castor arrives at the church and demands Kairi to tell her the location of the Lesser Grail, the vessel used for summoning the Holy Grail. She attacks him with golems when he refuses to disclose the information. Meanwhile, Shirou finds Rin at the top of a skyscraper. She tells Shirou that there is no longer a reason for him to be involved in the Holy Grail War without Saber as his servant. As Rin leaves with Archer, she warns Shirou to stay out of the Holy Grail War from now on, otherwise he will die. Returning home, Shirou Emiya reminisces about the fire he survived that inspired him to become a hero of justice. At the church, Castor visits Saber, who is resisting her magical bondage. Castor is then confronted by Suikairu Kyuzuki, who learns that her last two attacks had been of her own free will and that she intends to use the church to obtain the Lesser Grail. Meanwhile, Rin Tohsaka wakes up from another dream about Archer. The two go to the church where they find bloodstains, in which Rin concludes that Kairi Kotomine somehow managed to survive an attack made by Castor. Rin and Archer then confront Castor and Kyuzuki, but when Rin tries to fight them, Archer suddenly defends them from her attacks. Citing Saber's change in allegiance to Castor's side, Archer pledges his allegiance to Castor. He reveals that she is the ancient Greek princess Medea and allows her to stab him with Rule Breaker, which removes Rin's command seals. Kyuzuki tries to kill Rin, but she is saved by a recovered Shirou. When Castor counters with golems, Archer stops her and has her release Shirou and Rin as a condition for him joining forces with her. While on their way back to Shirou's home, Rin confesses that Archer joined Castor because he knew Rin's strategies were hopelessly flawed. Shirou counters by telling her that even though she failed this time, it does not mean she was wrong. After comforting her, Shirou returns the red jewel pendant that he found at her house, telling her that he has another one at his home. When Rin asks why he rescued her, Shirou confesses that he loves her, which initially embarrasses her. However, she thanks him for saving her life. At his home, Shirou tells Rin that he plans on continuing to fight in the Holy Grail War even without a servant. She replies that she has no choice but to let him before reaffirming their partnership. While discussing a strategy to defeat Castor and rescue Saber, the two decide to team up with Eliasfiel Einsburn, since Archer had told Rin that Berserker is in fact the ancient Greek hero Heracles, which might give them an advantage against Castor. Meanwhile, Castor recounts the time when she was summoned for the Holy Grail War by a mage named Atram Galiasta, only to be unsatisfied by his inefficient method of acquiring mana for her at his workshop. After Castor asked that she be allowed to acquire mana herself, Atram realized that he could not trust a magic user better than himself. As a result, he contacted Kairi, who told Atram to dispatch Castor first before making a pact with another servant. He then sends out a contract for Castor's death to his colleague, who happens to be the master of Lancer. When Atram returned to his workshop, Castor had already destroyed it in flames. He tried to use his command seals to force her into committing suicide, but it backfired as she had previously stabbed herself with the Rule Breaker. After she trapped Atram in an illusion of a labyrinth and immolated him, she was gravely injured by Lancer and barely escaped with her life. However, she was saved by Kyuzuki, who became her new master. In the present day, Elia observes Shirou and Rin traveling to her villa and sends out her maids Lacerit and Sella to receive them. However, the villa is breached by Shinji Mato and Gilgamesh, the latter who reveals that the Lesser Grail is being held inside Ilia's heart. When Laceret and Sella try to protect Ilia, Gilgamesh kills them with his noble phantasm known as Gate of Babylon, which can summon unlimited swords through a mystical vault. He is then confronted by Ilia, who orders Berserker to attack him. 10 years ago, in the aftermath of the Fourth Holy Grail War, Ilia had a vision of her mother Irisfield von Einsberg, who claimed her husband and Ilia's father, a participant in the war, betrayed them by refusing to accept the Holy Grail when it presented itself to him. At first she refused to believe it, but realized the truth when her father did not return home. As time passed, she stumbled upon a pool in her home, containing numerous homunculi that were created to serve Ilia's purpose only to fail in their missions. Realizing she is also a homunculus from their dying messages, Ilia became disillusioned with her life. Later on, she met Laceret and Sella, who assisted her in summoning Berserker. However, she initially did not want him, resolving to participate and win the Holy Grail War by herself. During the final test of her link ritual, she was separated from Berserker and lost her way in the nearby snowy woods. A pack of wolves attacked her, but she was rescued by Berserker. Afterwards, she realized that he protected her of his own free will. In the present day, Ilia and Berserker continue their battle against Gilgamesh as Shirou and Rin arrive to witness the event. Gilgamesh reveals Berserker's god hand gives him 12 lives, one for each of the labors of Heracles, and steadily depletes them with his countless noble phantasms from Gate of Babylon. As the battle reaches the main entrance, Gilgamesh eventually restrains Berserker using another noble phantasm known as Enkidu, a set of unbreakable binding chains. Gilgamesh impales Berserker with a large spear to make sure he can't resurrect anymore. Then he blinds Ilia and stabs her with a sword. As she crawls to Berserker's side, he breaks the chains and makes one last attempt to strike Gilgamesh, only to be killed. Shirou tries to intervene, but Ilia dies in comfort, believing Berserker is still at her side. As Gilgamesh tears out Ilia's heart from her corpse, Shirou and Rin confront Shinji and Gilgamesh. Rin forces them to leave when she threatens to kill Shinji and refuses to join his side. After burying Ilia, Rin confronts Shirou about his ideals and tells him that he needs to value himself over others, otherwise he will break. Shirou refutes this by the example of being rescued by Kiritsugu Emiya 10 years ago, which is something Shirou admires. However, Rin cites that Shirou will not truly understand happiness unless he lives for himself. Despite her argument, Shirou remains committed to his ideals. Later on, as they evaluate the power of Gilgamesh and conclude that Castor is still their priority, the two are approached by Lancer, who offers his assistance as per his master's order, which they accept. Meanwhile, Archer learns that Kizuki is helping Castor return to her original era using the Holy Grail. Archer later confronts Shirou, Rin, and Lancer as they arrive at the church. Lancer engages him to give Shirou and Rin time to breach the church. As they do so, Rin informs Shirou that there is only one red jewel pendant that exists in the world, which Archer had already returned such an item to her. In the church, Castor questions Kizuki about the fact that he has no desires, yet he has an objective. Shirou and Rin soon arrives to confront and fight Kizuki and Castor. Meanwhile, Lancer overwhelms Archer with his attacks, after which Archer infuriates Lancer by mocking his sense of loyalty and honor. As a result, Lancer tries to use his Gi-Balg to strike him down, but Archer is able to barely counter it with a magical barrier which expends most of his strength in the process and destroys the church. After praising Lancer's power, Archer reveals that he staged his betrayal of Rin so he could take advantage of Castor when she had her guard down, prompting Lancer to leave. Back at the church, Shirou and Rin are both overwhelmed by their opponents, but Archer suddenly appears and ambushes Kizuki by firing several swords at him. Castor shields Kizuki from the swords and is impaled herself. As she dies, she confesses to Kizuki that her wish has already been granted. Kizuki then tries to fight Archer, explaining that since he had participated in disrupting the usual proceedings of the Holy Grail War, he had to finish what he had started. He is then stabbed by Archer and crushed by a collapsing pillar. As Shirou attends to the captive Saber, Archer suddenly traps Rin inside a cage of swords and declares his intention as a guardian to kill Shirou. Saber risks her existence without a master, but still swearing an oath to protect Shirou. However, she is overwhelmed by Archer, forcing Shirou to intervene and take over in the fight. Rin takes advantage of this distraction to form a pact with Saber as master and servant. Fully restored, Saber subdues Archer, who mocks her for her wish of rectifying her legacy. Archer then uses his noble phantasm known as the Unlimited Blade Works, which is revealed as a reality marble, a spell that manifests an alternate reality which consists of a barren wasteland filled with swords and floating gears that traps Shirou, Saber, and Rin with him. After Archer creates and aims several swords at Saber, Shirou summons a sword of his own and destroys them, thereby dissipating Archer's Unlimited Blade Works. A weakened Archer grabs Rin, intending to use her as an insurance policy against Shirou and Saber while he recuperates for one day. Before he flees, Shirou tells him to meet him at Ilia's villa. Later on, a restrained Rin wakes up in the basement of Ilia's villa after having yet another dream about Archer, and confronts him about his past as a heroic spirit. Then Shinji and Gilgamesh arrive, and Archer agrees to give Rin to them for their own needs after he has finished killing Shirou. Back at his house, Shirou tells Saber to let him battle Archer while she saves Rin, also implying that he knows Archer's true identity. As they make their way to Ilia's villa, they are joined by Lancer, who is also determined to rescue Rin. As Shirou, Saber, and Lancer arrive at Ilia's villa, they are met by Archer, who explains that Rin's pendant was the catalyst used for his summoning. While Lancer runs off to retrieve Rin from Shinji, Saber demands to know why Archer is so intent on killing Shirou. Archer fulfilled his aspiring ideals to becoming a hero of justice, but he became disillusioned by it and chose to become a servant so he could rectify it. Saber is forced to reveal her true identity as King Arthur, who hoped to use the Holy Grail to undo her decision to become the King of Britain, as she believes it was her rule that eventually resulted in the country's destruction. Although Saber remarks she is different from Archer in terms of living up to their ideals, Archer elaborates that he was dissatisfied when he was a guardian who was being forced to take lives in order to save many more. He concludes that his ideals were shallow and that it was impossible to save everyone as he envisioned. Archer then reveals his true identity as Shirou's future self from an alternate universe, the counter-guardian heroic spirit Emiya. Meanwhile, Shinji tries to harass Rin only for Lancer to arrive and incapacitate him. Kairi suddenly appears and unveils himself to be Lancer's master. He further discloses that he killed Rin's father in the previous Holy Grail War and therefore was the master with dark intentions. Kairi orders Lancer to kill Rin, intending to use her body as a vessel for the Holy Grail. When Lancer refuses, Kairi uses one of his many command seals and orders Lancer to commit suicide. Back at the main entrance, Archer tosses Shirou one of his swords and orders him to kill himself with it. However, Shirou declines, proclaiming that he will do all he can to avoid becoming Archer. As a result, Shirou and Archer prepare to engage each other in battle. During the battle, Shirou finds that while he is only barely able to hold off Archer's attacks, he is slowly becoming stronger the longer he clashes with Archer. Meanwhile, Kairi prepares to take Rin's heart against Shinji's protests. However, Lancer, who is mortally wounded but still alive, fatally stabs Kairi. Shinji, on the verge of insanity, takes this opportunity to get his hands on Rin again, only to be chased off by Lancer. After freeing Rin, Lancer collapses to the ground and laments how he would have liked for Rin to be his master. Both Rin and Lancer bid farewell to each other. As she leaves, Lancer sets a fire to destroy both himself and Kairi's corpse. Back at the main entrance, Shirou and Archer continue to battle, with Archer activating his unlimited blade works and slowly gaining the upper hand. As their swords clash, Shirou begins to see Archer's memories and becomes aware of what his future holds in store for him. With his belief shaken, Shirou is quickly defeated by Archer and left on the verge of death. As he lies on the ground, Shirou begins to reflect on the memories he gained from Archer, as well as the memories of Kiritsugu saving him 10 years ago. From this, Shirou concludes his ideals are not wrong and he decides to continue fighting. At that moment, Saber's scabbard Avalon, which Kiritsugu had placed inside Shirou to heal the injuries he sustained from the fire, activates and heals Shirou's wounds. With his confidence in his ideals restored, Shirou prepares to battle Archer again, with the declaration that he will defeat Archer. As the battle continues, Archer chastises Shirou for continuing to pursue his ideals, declaring he will wipe out every trace of Shirou's existence. However, Archer begins to realize that Shirou will never give up and that it is pointless to defeat him now. Finally, as Shirou explains the beauty he saw in his ideals, his spirit begins to overwhelm Archer's unlimited blade works. Shirou rushes towards Archer, who becomes distracted by a flashback of Kiritsugu's last moments. Archer is wounded by Shirou just as Rin arrives. Suddenly, Archer is impaled by 3 swords fired by Gilgamesh. Declaring his hatred for fakes, Gilgamesh uses his Gate of Babylon to fire more swords, but Archer pushes Shirou out of the way and seemingly dies after taking the full force of the attack. Expressing a familiarity with Gilgamesh, Saber demands to know why he is here. He explains that after the end of the 4th Holy Grail War, he bathed in the Holy Grail during its destruction at the hands of Saber 10 years ago and took physical form. He further explains the true function of the Holy Grail as a container for thousands of curses, before announcing his intention to take it for himself and use it as a weapon to eradicate the human race, as he is disgusted by the lifestyle of modern humans and hopes to rule over any potential survivors. He then leaves the villa as the fire Lancer started spreads through the building. Later, he finds Shinji in the forest and learns from him about Kairi's death and the reason behind Rin's escape. When Shinji asks about finding a vessel for the Holy Grail, Gilgamesh implants Elias's heart into him, deeming him a worthy vessel, and leaves him as he begins to mutate into a massive shapeless form of flesh. Once Shirou, Saber, and Rin return to Shirou's home, they all decide to avenge Archer and stop Gilgamesh by destroying the Holy Grail once and for all. Through the use of familiar spirits, Rin deduces that the Holy Grail is being summoned at Ryudu Temple. She then explains that Shinji, the only other mage participating in the Holy Grail War, would be the only viable candidate as a substitute vessel, as it was apparent that Emiya was supposed to turn into the Lesser Grail at the end of the war. While devising a strategy to defeat Gilgamesh, Rin realizes that Archer was the only one able to perfectly counter him, since Archer had the ability to summon a duplicate of any kind of weapon. She concludes that Shirou needs to master unlimited blade work so he too can match up against Gilgamesh. Since he does not have the sufficient mana to do so, Rin improvises by performing a ritual that implants her magic crest from her left arm into Shirou, thus allowing them to share their mana storage. During the ritual, Shirou inadvertently taps into Rin's memories, including one where Rin once saw Shirou practicing the high jump and fell in love with him, which embarrasses her. Afterwards, Shirou finds Saber exploring his house and she thanks him for showing her the way to her dream. She has him promise that he and Rin will survive the Holy Grail War. Meanwhile, Gilgamesh finishes transporting Shinji to Ryudu Temple and summons the Holy Grail. Shirou and Rin plans to breach Ryudu Temple and rescue Shinji while Saber fights Gilgamesh and destroys the Holy Grail. Saber reveals that she can only use her noble phantasm Excalibur once before fading, since Rin cannot supply Saber with enough mana due to sharing it with Shirou. At Ryudu Temple, Shirou and Rin observe Shinji's mutated form and a torrent of black ooze pouring out from the Holy Grail pooling around Shinji and forming a lake. They are then confronted by Gilgamesh, who elaborates on his intentions and explains that there are too many people in the modern era without significance or purpose. At the main gate, Saber instead comes across Assassin, who is still guarding the temple despite Castor's death, as it is his anchor to the world. He reveals that he is not actually the fictitious Sasaki Kajiro, but a nameless swordsman similar to him, then expresses a desire to finish his duel with Saber before he fades. As Shirou fights Gilgamesh, the Holy Grail is bombarded by what Gilgamesh claims to be mankind's malevolent wishes. Rin approaches the massive flesh and manages to remove Shinji from it, causing it to try and use Gilgamesh as a replacement vessel. However, Gilgamesh defends himself with his most powerful noble phantasm, a sword called E. Meanwhile, Assassin reveals to Saber that he is already starting to fade and uses his swallow reversal. Saber reveals Excalibur's blade, dodges his strike and fatally wounds him. Gilgamesh mocks Shirou with his ideals after the latter is largely incapacitated by the effects of E. Although Shirou admits the flaws in his idealism, he reaffirms his dream nonetheless. Saber arrives and blocks an attack made by Gilgamesh, but Shirou orders Saber to save Rin instead. Having an epiphany about the true nature of his powers, Shirou activates his unlimited blade works and uses its infinite number of replica swords to counter Gilgamesh's Gate of Babylon. Meanwhile, Saber approaches the Holy Grail and recognizes it as a corrupted servant called Angramaniu, which has been summoned improperly. She locates Rin, who uses a command seal, and orders Saber to destroy the Holy Grail with Excalibur as Rin is being consumed by Angramaniu. When she loses hope of surviving, Archer's voice reprimands her for giving up, and a barrage of swords strikes Angramaniu, freeing her. With Rin free and using her final command seal to augment her attack, Saber unleashes Excalibur, destroying Angramaniu and the Holy Grail. As she fades, Saber admits that she would have liked to stay with Shirou and Rin, but accepts that her role is over. Inside Shirou's unlimited blade works, he begins to overwhelm Gilgamesh, who furiously draws E, but Shirou severs Gilgamesh's arm and slashes his chest before running out of mana. Gilgamesh, grievously injured but alive, prepares to finish him off, but a portal to the Holy Grail opens and engulfs him. He ensnares Shirou with chains of heaven in order to pull himself out. But Archer, having survived Gilgamesh's previous attack, intervenes by shooting a dagger into Gilgamesh's head. As he speaks his last words, Gilgamesh is consumed by Angramaniu before the portal closes. Rin and Archer say farewell as he fades away, with Archer asking Rin to look after his past self. Shirou reunites with Rin and they walk off together as a couple. 2 years after the events of the Fifth Holy Grail War, Shirou and Rin are still dating and living together in an apartment in London while they both study under the Maids Association at the Clock Tower, with Shirou apprenticing under Rin as protection for her. However, he is still struggling with following his ideals without walking the same path as Archer. One day, Rin loses a duel with her classmate and neighbor Luviegelida Edelfelt, who repeatedly flirts with an oblivious Shirou, much to Rin's chagrin. Afterwards, Shirou and Rin talk about his invitation to officially join the Maids Association, which conflicts with his ideals. One morning, Rin decides to take Shirou to Glastonbury, the final resting place of King Arthur, so he can say goodbye to Saber. During the trip back home, Shirou reminisces about when he graduated from his second year of high school. The next day Shirou encounters Waver Velvet, a survivor of the Fourth Holy Grail War, who questions him about his reasons for coming to the Clock Tower and studying magic after surviving the Fifth Holy Grail War. Shirou walks away as he says that he wants to dedicate his life to being a hero of justice. Waver responds that this is a foolish endeavor, although not without its merits. Shirou returns to the apartment and informs Rin that he has declined the invitation, saying that he cannot change who he is even if he is destined to meet the same fate as Archer. Rin responds that Shirou will go farther in following his ideals even if Archer walked the same path. She then assures Shirou that she will always be by his side. In the epilogue, Archer is shown sitting inside his unlimited blade works reconsidering his life and purpose. While he admits his regrets and curses the path he took, he asserts in the end that despite being wrong in how he went about achieving them, he was never wrong in his ideals. And this brings the anime to an end. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Also turn on notifications so you don't miss out on another video. Until next time, farewell.